to stop yawning.
Hey, yo, it's me, Pops Fan Marmalade, and you're watching the Comics-Related Madness Network. Uh-huh. So come get some. CromCon. CromCon.
If you're a fan of comic books and comic book conventions, Daytona Beach Comic Con needs to be on your list of must-attend events. It's a show that actually focuses on comic books. Imagine that! This year's event is happening on Saturday, September the 6th, and Sunday, September the 7th. Silverline creators will be there, so we'll see you at the show. There's a new convention in town, and it's sure to be mega fun without the mega expense. Comics, toys, collectibles, pop culture. ShadowCon, Saturday, February 1st, 2025, in Orlando, Florida. Silverline creators will be there, so we'll see you at the show. If you find yourself in the Orlando area, and let's be honest, doesn't everyone come to Orlando for the House of Mouse? Head over to Coliseum of Comics to get your comic book fix. Be sure to check out their location on East Colonial Drive, where they carry a wide selection of independent comics, including Silverline books. Stop by and don't forget to tell them Silverline sent you. Hey, if you're an independent comic creator looking to get your comic printed, look no further than Kablam Digital Printing. They print our comics and do a fantastic job. They can even print special edition covers. When you reach out to them, be sure to tell them Silverline sent you.
Hi, this is Tim TK, host of That Silverline Show on Tuesday. Join us at 11 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. Pacific every Tuesday night as we discuss pop culture and the joys of making comics.
Hi, I'm Barb Kilber, co-host of Silverline's Wednesday Wham. Join us each Wednesday nights as we discuss comics, literature, movies, and anything else that may catch our attention.
I'm Roland Mann, and I host Silverline's Silver Sunday. Join me every Sunday at 8 p.m. Eastern as we make mine Silverline.
Hello, Internet. Welcome to That Silverline Show on Tuesday. I'm your host, Tim TK, and I'm joined, as always, by Ron Fortier.
Hi, all.
And David Rios.
Hello.
And Jose Fuentes.
You can't prove that.
Who we missed last week.
All right.
Last week was fun.
Yes. Tonight we are going to be talking about the last day of pre-orders for Wolf Hunter number 2. As that is currently going on, I am trying to get some trailers ready. All right, it's going to be.
You can do a beat 10, beat Skynet.
It worked. All right, and thank you, Casey, for checking in. So. Like I said, tonight is going to be the last night report for Wolf Hunter number 2. We have already hit our goal, so now it's just icing on the cake.
Here we go. Another successful campaign. Yeehaw.
Yes. And we are at 850 or 830 right now. If we do go up to 875 or 850, I can't remember what it was. I think it's 875. Then all backers will get an additional short story set in the Wolf Hunter universe, sent via PDF.
Nice.
Nice. Very nice.
Yes. So Wolf Hunter 2 is, of course, a secret history spy story that I wrote following the Tizard mission during World War II. During which German spies steal the prototype radar before it can make its way to Liverpool to be sent over to America. and it's up to a shell-shocked and wounded RAF group captain who's been recruited by Winston Churchill to his secret army to hunt down and eliminate German spies. And we should have trailers working now. It's probably going to be really loud, so I'll advise if we're in headphones, you might want to turn the volume down. But I'll run the trailer for us now. We finally have working video. All it took was downloading YouTube links and converting them to MP4s. But yeah, that's kind of long and short of it. We do still have some original inks from Tommy Florimonte available. So if you want to get those added onto your order, you have until the end of today to buy them. And of course, Tommy will sign them if you catch him at any convention or bike trail, kind of wherever you might find a wild Tommy. We'll probably sign it.
Bike trail.
Yeah. But yeah, like I said before on previous episodes, this is a very interesting comic to have written and worked on. I love the team that has done the art for it. We spent a lot of time kind of coming together this aesthetic that allows for very poppy colors, very Euro comic style, a lot of influence from 90s Euro comics. So if you like spy stories, if you like some old school storytelling, took a lot of influence from like John le Carre, of course. So you've already seen the fight scene and the body and the promotional material, so it's your job as a reader to tell me where the lie is. Because I can guarantee you that we as a creative team have lied to you during the process of your reading Wolf Hunter issue number 1 and 2. So there is that. Of course, we'd be remiss without also promoting Hamlet's End to number 1, Ron's comic, which is currently on Kickstarter. And the project is a little earlier on in its days. You got 30 days left to go. And they're at $700 of their $3,000 goal. We do also have a trailer for this, so I'll run that and then let Ron talk about it.
All right.
Docking complete.
The Western genre is ripe for a comeback, with dynamic characters, intense action, and the rich American landscape. It's a storyteller's dream. That's why we've created our own Western adventure, gritty, raw, and ready for you. I'm Ron Fortier, the writer of Hamlet's End. In my 50-year career, I've written everything from Popeye, Peter Pan, The Green Hornet, Rambo, Terminator, and Gene Roddenberry's Lost Universe, among many of my own creations. This is my first Western. Our story is set in Arkansas, 1870, where a young woman named Dallas Maddox embarks on a journey of vengeance after her family is brutally murdered. Although a natural-born hunter, this time her prey is the two-legged variety. We wanted to capture the tension of survival in a lawless time, and Dallas is a character who embodies both strength and vulnerability. This is more than just another Western. This is a story of revenge, of survival, of one determined young woman facing impossible odds. It's not just about shootouts and chases. This is about justice and how far one person will go to get it. We've a gripping story with a remarkable heroine and jaw-dropping artwork. Now we need your help to bring this vision to life. Vengeance rides on the horizon. Dallas Maddox is ruthless and deadly, leaving legends and bodies in her wake as she grows into the most feared bounty hunter the West has ever known. Don't miss the ride. Don't miss Hamlet's End, Issue 1.
All right, awesome.
Go. And that's all the work of artist Zane the Game, who put that whole thing together. I was blown away the first time I saw it. I thought it was absolutely fantastic. I just love, I just love the. I mean, he wrote the script. He wrote, whatever for me to narrate. And when like I said, it's one thing to do it and photograph it in our local comic shop and then in my office and et cetera, et cetera. But then to watch it the first time last week when he first put it up on the Kickstarter site, and to hear the twangy Western music on top of everything else, I'm like, oh, right, we got a cowboy story here. Here we go.
Absolutely.
It's fun. It's just a lot of fun. And I thanks for putting it up. I really appreciate that. The more we get the word out and let people know about it, obviously our first goal, is to get the set amount that Zane set for the project to print the comic. If we get up to the next tier, it'll go from black and white to color. And I liked what he did at the end with that double page spread, showing it in black and white and what happens when you add color to it. And it makes a huge difference. So we're keeping our fingers crossed that we can reach that level. And again, it's due to everybody out there watching. And we like to tell folks, hey, if you're not in a position to help, then by all means, just simply share the word, get the word of mouth out, share the link. It's up on Facebook. I've got it up on X, LinkedIn, and other places, including right here. So we're off and at 'em.
Absolutely. Well,
hey,
thank you, Ron.
I wanted to talk to you because in the interim, since our show last week, we got the regular Silverline newsletter that Roland puts out, and you'd written up a little bit about Wolf Hunter. And I was reading through it, and I got a kick out of the fact that it also dealt with radar.
Yeah.
As used during the war. And I wanted to pass this along to you because it was a little bit of personal experience on my end many, many years ago when I was still living back in New England. There was a Catholic senior facility a few miles down the road from where I lived. And at one time during the summer, I volunteered there, and like once an afternoon, one afternoon a week, I'd go down there and I'd spend a couple hours with a couple of gentlemen well into their 80s and 90s reading for them. Their eyesight wasn't that, good anymore. And there's this one guy that I read to. His name is Joe, and he was from northern Maine. And prior to even sitting down and reading from the book, whichever one he wanted me to, to go through, we talked a little bit about his life. And he was telling me about how he left the farm and moved down to Massachusetts, and he started working in Massachusetts just about the time World War II got underway. And the factory he was working on in Massachusetts was making radar for the British.
Yeah.
That's what they were doing. That was basically really important war effort work, because the Brits were really in desperate need of that. Just as you said in your newsletter, all right? The quicker they could pick up, German bombers coming in, the quicker they could get their own defenses up and stop them. So he said, they work 7 days a week around the clock getting those things done.
Yeah. Well, that's also something that is what inspired the name of the comic itself. Was I was trying to think of some sort of play off of Spy Hunter, because there's a really good song by Project 86 called Spy Hunter, and I was listening to that and repeat as I was like thinking up the stuff goes along with the Wolf Hunter, and I knew I wanted to do something with the Tizard mission, and I was thinking about how that impacted the war effort, and it was being able to get the magnetron from London to Liverpool up to Canada and then down to New York and Maine and all that was what would allow them to eventually get those units of small package radars attached to Hawker Hurricanes that are being built in America via Lend-Lease and then shipped back to Britain, and then later Spitfires. And part of what that also allowed them to do was to actually begin an aerial war targeting the wolf packs, the German U-boats that had effectively cut America's ability to send boats to England and back and forth and so on. And that's why they had to do those decoy convoys and rogue convoys that went up through the Arctic Circle.
Right.
And we're like, where the kind of idea of the toughest nails merchant marine came from, because they're cutting through Arctic winds with almost no sleep and no stop, just doing back and forth routes.
Unbelievable.
So, the idea of this one mission and their ability to get this one prototype would allow them to essentially create a new Royal Air Force of wolf hunters. They'd be able to hunt down these U-boats and take them out via torpedo before they could destroy convoys.
Yep.
Yeah. So I thought it was really interesting how, as big an event as World War II is, right, it shapes much of modern history and as well as the map of Europe as it exists today.
Oh, for sure.
So much of it came down to these small little stories that happened over the course of a day or over several hours, where this one small event would then impact how things changed and went on down the road.
Oh,
yeah.
It's amazing what technology will do when your survival depends on it,
Yeah.
How fast can you rev up that war machine, and we know by our own history that the home front, factories across the country got into it, building, everything that was crucial, right? Mm-hmm. From radar to parts for bombers, et cetera, et cetera. Rosita Riveter becomes famous as that image of the home front war,
Yeah.
And again, it's a case of which country can produce the most, the quickest.
Mm-hmm. Oh, some of my favorite stories is some of it's fictionalized now, but there's still some truth to it, and even the fiction to it is fascinating. Also, small little events like the Father's Army, where you had a bunch of people who lived in Dover, England, and they're just a bunch of either World War I vets or just old hunters and farmers who had their homestead rifle or whatever, and they take pot shots at German spotters across the channel when they got the chance.
I can see it. I can totally see that. Yeah.
Or whenever they would, whenever German boats had come through when they're looking at doing Operation Sea Lion, they just have cracks of hunting of inaccurate fire from hunting rifles, but it was just these small little stories about the efforts at home, and as well as the commitment to people's survival, as well as to the kind of the clashing ideologies and beliefs at the time.
It's a whole new meaning of doing your part, right?
Yep. So, like I said, tonight is the last hour to get your pre-order info for number 2. So we're going to be talking about more World War II stuff. I don't really have much planned outline for tonight because I want to do it more kind of freeform and open. So I wanted to ask you guys if there is any part about Wolf Hunter that you're interested in and wanted to ask about or want to talk about, or if there's any part of like World War II history or anything like that that you think would be interesting to talk about.
I mean, World War II history in general, excuse me, is interesting.
Yeah.
Like just as a whole. I know my wife and my father-in-law were very, very much into like not my father-in-law definitely was into the military stuff. He was very much a military man, you know what I mean, at the heart. But him and my wife like to watch like things like Schindler's List, stuff like that, you know what I mean? Anything that had to deal with the Jewish aspect of the world wars and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
It was very much something that they followed. But my father-in-law liked to watch pretty much every military movie I could think of. He probably saw it. You know what I mean? So just when you Ron had mentioned like was it Rosie the Riveter and whatnot, the idea that and the comment I made about doing your part, that was kind of something that was said, right? That was like a saying, a motto during the time and whatnot for those that couldn't go to war, those that didn't go to war. When I do your part here, and that was, you know what I mean? That was making manufacturing parts for the airplanes, manufacturing parts for tanks and whatnot. And I totally forgot where I was going with that.
Well, I mean, it shaped everything, Jose. What you're talking about, I mean, we're touching on the subject of the war effort itself, right? And the things that the war, the Department of Defense said, okay, so this is what we need, all right? And you turn to American industry and said, how fast can you produce it? Everything from, again, bullets to electronic parts for radios, all right, tubes and all that good stuff, right? And to get that kind of stuff done and out at the same time, what the war did, and then and the flip coin of that, focusing the entire country into one goal, all right, which is basically give our GIs and sailors everything they need to win this thing, all right? Because obviously, the alternative is the country's gone. Freedom and democracy across the world are gone if we don't win this thing. Well, the flip side of that is, aside from people actually working in those factories, okay, the average American families, young and old too, had to give up things that they were used to having. And we all know about war drives, all right? I mean, the shape of American publishing changed drastically during the war years, all right? And what I, ragged on a lot of times because it's something that's passionate to my heart was American pulps almost died completely during the war because of paper shortages. Prior to the war, I mean, publishers got as much paper as they wanted. And there was nothing to go to any kiosk or newsstand or spinner rack in a drugstore or whatever across America and see literally hundreds of new pulp titles coming out every single week. That stopped. That totally stopped because, and I don't pretend to know what the use of all that paper was, but the military says, hey, we need this paper. Yeah. All right. So suddenly, publishers are told, well, the output that we allowed you to cut trees in and go to lumber mills or whatever, we're going to cut by 70, 80%. Man, the minute you do that, like I said, a lot of publishers started pulling back, and that was it. You could not publish that many magazines. It was impossible. You didn't have the paper to do it, or the ink, or whatever else it was that you needed. So that we get to the end of those 4 or 5 years, and publishing as the average Americans knew before the war had changed completely.
Yeah.
And you know, it was a case of scrabbling to stay afloat, to stay in business, to see if you could survive those years of lean. All right. I mean, you know, paper drives, everything, bottle drives. All right. People going, you know, kids going around the neighborhood with their little red wagons, picking up whatever metals they could find, scrap metal, you know, and bringing it to the junkyard guy and whatever. Okay. I mean, literally, America was in the business of collecting everything it could get that in some way, shape, or form could go towards the war effort.
Yeah. And it wasn't just like legitimate business too, which I think is interesting. One of my favorite stories, it got turned into a comic by Stephanie Phillips, actually. It's called We Only Kill Each Other. But one of my favorite stories about this time period is the fact that it's kind of a part of, you know, part of American history we don't like is that up until about 1938, 1939, there was also a strong Nazi movement, and it started taking root in America, the Fatherland movement, saying, you know, German Americans need to return to the Fatherland and do their part. However, the Italian mafia, which had a lot of Jewish members, and the Irish mafia, which is very Catholic, absolutely hated these guys. So they teamed up with the FBI, and the FBI said, like, hey, you know, if one of these like guys who has ties to Nazi Germany just winds up dead in the river, we won't investigate. You guys do your part. And they said, all right, we'll take off our own. But if we find someone who's like, you know, outside of New York City or whatever, outside of Jersey, we'll give his family information over to you. And so you had this 5-year, 6-year truce that happened between the Irish mafia and the Italian mafia and the FBI. And they all said, all right, we're just going to deal with the American Fatherland movement that's there taking place.
Oh boy, I tell you, the Bund was very, very active prior to World War II, as like you said, because there were a lot of German immigrants in this country at that time. All right, and I mean, it's a classic. I mean, one of the kicks I got out of was when first time I saw The Rocketeer.
Yeah.
And that bit about Paul Sorvino, right? Pointing at Timothy Dalton, who's a German spy working out of Hollywood, but he goes, I may not make an honest buck, but it's all American.
Yeah.
He's a gangster. And there was a movie made during the war, a black and white, with Humphrey Bogart. All right. And what was it called? It's going to drive me crazy now. Something to the effect of in the middle of the night or the silent night or whatever. But the concept of the story was it takes place in New York in the middle of the war, and Humphrey Bogart plays a 2-bit hood with his own gang, right? And he's called Glove something. And sure enough, Nazi Bunt and Nazi spies have moved into Manhattan, and they're planning to blow up the Brooklyn Harbor. And these hoods, these gangsters, find out about it and take them on. And it's like one of my favorite all-time Humphrey Bogart movies. So, I mean, again, it's just it pops up everywhere. All right, just every time you turn around and look, and it's one of the reasons I get a kick out of watching, especially like Turner Classic Movies and watching old movies. Not only just war movies, but those movies that were made during the war. All right, and that whole effort and stuff like that. One of the things that I've talked about in the past, as far as comics and comic history, all right, I mean, literally after a couple of years of the war being on, I mean, it doesn't take a lot of imagination to think of that generation of kids who read comics in 1943, 44, all right, where, I mean, you walk to any small town, and the first thing you saw that was gone was the average age, middle-aged young guy gone. Most towns were suddenly left to older men or kids. And kids knew. That generation growing up during the war knew what was going on, all right? And you can only imagine the heartache, the loneliness of wondering if your dad was going to come home or your uncle or your older brother and what they had to endure And somehow, in a small little way, I tip my hat to the comic industry, because we were given characters like Captain America, Uncle Sam. I mean, even Wonder Woman ran around with a red, white, and blue outfit. I mean, come on. I mean, that was just abject propaganda to little kids, to basically buoy them up every day when Dad wasn't home and you didn't know if he'd ever come home. But you could read Uncle Sam or all these other World War II comic book heroes, all right? And that little thought about the fact that these guys are on our side, all right? You know, there was no Captain Nazi, right? There was no Super Tojo and any of that stuff. But America had American comic books. And like I say, I tip my hat for those writers and artists during the war years, because they did their part just like everybody else did.
I mean, we got the iconic panel of Captain America punching Hitler.
Of course. Yeah. Really. Oh, classic. Are you kidding? Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I know. I always love kind of how that kind of became like a theme too when we ended up getting the villain of Red Skull, who he really did such a good job of like personifying kind of the horrific aspects of sort of that supremacist, but also like technologically advancing ideology, right? Of like believing they some sort of supremacy, while also just trying to push more and more mystical or scientific things that like the Wonder Weapon program was trying to do. But then the amount of times that he just gets absolutely bodied because the good guy has to always win in the end, right? But my favorite things is I think it was one of the most recent DC Marvel crossovers where the Joker doesn't realize that he's working with Red Skull, who is a Nazi. And when Captain America tells him, he turns on Red Skull and says, I may be a psychopath, but I'm an American psychopath.
There you go. Oh, yeah.
Standards, right? Even Joker has standards.
Even Joker has standards, yeah. Like, I want to go back to something you're talking about, Jose, which is talking about kind of understanding the Jewish stories from the wars. And I think that there's a lot of really interesting parts to explore that besides just surviving the Holocaust, but also the emotional whiplash that happened in Germany leading into World War II before the mass exodus and the broken glass. And the kind of stuff that like I grew up hearing about because on my father's side they're Jewish. I'm a mudblood. It's on the wrong side, so I don't get the I don't get the club card. But there's also a really good comic from Marvel. It's Magneto Origins, something like that. I can't remember exactly what it is, or it's either it's like Eric Fletcher. But it's a story about Magneto and his family in Germany before World War II starts off. And they pull on real history for it too, which I think is a really smart way of adding so much depth to an already very deep character, as well as understanding the emotional trauma that builds the idea of a guy who like will so violently like say never again whenever mutants are faced with extinction. And one of the things they mentioned is the fact that during World War I, members of the Jewish diaspora could not get citizenship in Prussia or Germany. However, during World War I, Kaiser Wilhelm says, "I don't care where you're from. If you fight in the Kaiserreich, you fight in the Kaiser's army, you were granted full citizenship." And this is the first time that the members of the Jewish diaspora could do that in parts that were part of the German Empire. So they're given like the full, like gold badge that like signified that they were given a commissariat citizenship. And for a lot of people, this was like a huge part of like pride, saying like, I fought for a place that I believed in. I did my part. I'm a patriot. And even though we lost, I got my citizenship. And then when the Nazi Party takes power and when they start revoking Jewish citizenships, as well as confiscating their gold, they're taking back those citizenship badges, those as army medals. And that's something they mentioned, is that Magneto watches his dad lose that medal. And that's, even though it's been years since I read that comic, that's just such an emotional arc that it gets burned into understanding kind of the human tragedy that goes into war as well. And not just like the truly horrific moments, but also the more personally horrific moments, right? The things where it's for one person, they just kind of watch the entire world crumble around them.
All right. That's crazy to think about it, seriously. Is that, so let me ask, historically, and I for one don't know a lot of that particular history, but is that why the Jewish people were given like the gold stars in the concentration camp and whatnot? Was that like a, not so much a parody, but like an in-your-face kind of thing?
It's kind of a moment where, yeah, it was said to be like, we're like, to make up for the gold we confiscated from you, we're going to give you a star that marks you as golden people, as the chosen people, right? And so, and because of also the amount of symbolism that gold has in the Jewish faith and in Jewish culture, so it was kind of just, I don't know if it's intentionally like a spite, but it definitely like felt like one in the moment, from like what I've been told and what I've read, but it also kind of, they used it as one of like a way of being able to lie and make it more easy to place on people. So they say like, no, we're getting this because you're part of the chosen people. It's not anything untoward. We're just marking you with a golden star because it's important to your people.
Gotcha.
Yeah. I kind of, I don't want to get too deep into it, but there's similar stuff that also happened in like Allied countries during World War II as well. One of the individuals we meet in Wolf Hunter issue number 2 is a member of the Romani diaspora who were kicked out from Eastern Europe, and when they moved to England, they weren't granted full citizenship either. And that's where we got, the slang term gypsy and all this other stuff, is because they're just people who came here to avoid all this stuff happening out east, and then had to make work in whatever factory work they could get in or whatever without being granted citizenship until after the war had ended.
I didn't know that either.
Yeah,
I told you I don't know a lot about history like that. Like,
yeah,
the World War histories and stuff.
Yeah, well, it's also really interesting because like, if you're also a fan of F1 racing, you know that F1 kind of came out of pre-World War II into mid-World War II France, because they had the Le Mans and all this like racing going on, where a lot of people were getting cars. Like a lot of Irish drivers came down. A lot of people from England and America also moved to France to participate in these auto races because nothing's really happening like that. Well, a lot of Romani people that were escaping from Eastern Europe before World War II kicked off also came over there, and a lot of them were really good drivers because they were used to doing horse and cart races and things like that. And so there's a lot of also like Romani culture that ended up going into building F1, into sort of the color scheming, like why Ferrari has such bright, vibrant colors, and why like those, a lot of those other things do. Like part of it's the Italian culture, but also part of it's come to the Romani heritage in racing. And so that may be spoilers for issue number 3. We may have a Romani driver in issue number 3. But there's a lot of weird things about how it feels weird to say, like silver linings on like catastrophic events, but you're kind of thinking about like how something so terrible that happened to so many people and to so many different people just because of they're born with a certain family name or they're born in a certain place. But then after time has like subsided and they get time to reconcile, how they're able to birth kind of like these beloved pastimes and be part of like the legacy of this, because they survived and fought and found a way to contribute where they found their new home.
I mean, the suffering that Hitler and the Nazis put on the Jewish people in their country, I mean, is beyond what we can imagine, and it crossed every cultural line there was. It wasn't just the average citizen. It just wasn't just the average, shop owner or whatever. They were the master race, and they wanted control of everything, including what they considered culture. And tons of gifted musicians, actors, people, the arts, painters fled Germany when they came to power and saw what was being done to their country. A lot of them ended up back in the States.
Yeah.
Prior to Hitler and the Nazis taking complete control, a lot of musicians who were classically trained German musicians ended up in the States, either working on Broadway and working in musical theater there, or eventually migrating to California, where they literally became some of the greatest film composers that helped create the golden age of Hollywood.
Absolutely.
And people like Max Steiner, who was Jewish and fled, his native Austria, came to this country and ended up writing scores for things like Gone with the Wind and King Kong and hundreds of other amazing scores. One of my all-time favorite composers was Ernst Wolfgang Korngold. And following others, Congo came over and thought he was only going to stay a couple of years in Hollywood and started writing, scores for them. And what happened with him was, at one point, the studios came to him and asked him to write the score to the new Adventures of Sherlock Holmes with Errol Flynn, at which point Korngold missed his home state of Austria so much that he basically declined and said that he was homesick and he wanted to get back to Austria. His friends warned him not to go, that it was dangerous, that the Germans were moving in. They'd already invaded Poland. And sure enough, I think something like 2 or 3 days before they were to leave, the Germans invaded Austria and took over the entire country. And that was it. Korngold and his family couldn't go home. He turned around and went to see Jack Warner at Warner Brothers and said, I'll do the score to Robin Hood, and created one of the greatest absolute film scores out there. And this was typical. It happened to literally thousands of gifted, talented people. Marlene Dietrich, the actress, basically packed her bags and left and said she'd never worked for Hitler or his regime ever. And there were, again, scores of others that followed her along. So it was, as much as people, we tend to look at the Holocaust as we should, as how Jewish people were targeted, as they have been throughout history. It's one of the curses that comes with their blessing as being the chosen people, and they're targeted for that reason. All right, and they've suffered things that no other race has ever suffered or come close to it. But at the same time, we tend to forget there are also literally hundreds and thousands of decent German people, all right, who had their entire lives turned upside down.
Right.
Men who were conscripted, drafted, and forced to fight in a war they wanted no part of. They wanted nothing to do with the Nazis. And a lot of them lost their lives, and a lot of them just, as traitors or whatever. I mean, I can remember meeting several German people years ago back in New England that were part of our parish, who had been born and brought up in Germany. And this one woman was telling me that her father had been forced to fight in the war. And if he didn't go, they'd shoot him on the spot. He had no choice in the matter. Yeah. So again, I mean, Hitler was the devil incarnate, and he caused so much grief that, he spends the rest of eternity in hell. It's too short a time as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. Well, Ron asked some interesting point about how there was decent Germans. I mean, even in the German army and the German like cabinet, there were still people who saw what Hitler was doing and said, like, this isn't the Germany that I remember, and kind of fought from the inside to do things. And now, obviously, like Operation Valkyrie is probably the most well-known of this, the attempted assassination of Hitler, where that unfortunately failed and the conspirators were executed. But one of my favorite pieces of history, well, two of them, I'll pose this as a question. Does anyone know the last battle of World War II? And does anyone know the last Eastern Front operation of World War II? That, like, the last Eastern Front operation of World War II happened after the Russians moved in on Berlin. So this is actually a little interesting. So the last Eastern Front operation was Operation Rodeo, where a bunch of German exiles who were said to be not loyal enough to be on the front lines were put into the rear guard and were watching over what were essentially Austrian horses that Hitler wanted because they were supposed to be like purebreds, like they're because even like his idea of supremacy extended to like German horses were better than any other horse, right? And they're like, these are good horses, but whatever. So, but then what had happened is that the Russian peasants' army had started moving in on this place, and like these are a bunch of like conscripts that don't necessarily care what's happening. They're going to kill us, the horses, and all civilians here. So they contacted Patton and said, "Hey, can you open up a hole in your like line, and we're just going to run our convoy of trucks and horses into you guys, and we're going to give the Americans all these purebred horses." And so I said, "Yeah, sure, whatever." So the Americans did a screening operation for Germans who didn't like Hitler, but were really loyal to these horses.
Well, Lippenzahn, right?
Yeah.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't Disney make a movie of that?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, they did. Disney
War
actually
Horse?
told that story. I remember
the War
seeing
Horse movie?
Not War Horse.
No.
No, these were trained Lippenzahn white stallions.
Yeah.
And basically what happened was, just as Tim just said, the Russians are moving in. The people who brought up these horses, trained them, maintained them, and kept them, saw them as a national treasure to the old Germany and the people, you know, again, the tradition of the country and those kind of things that were still decent, and wanted to save those horses because the Russians would have just killed them, just totally butchered them.
And not just that, but that's what saved every...
They worked out a deal with the Americans moving in to basically let them get through their lines untouched so that they could save them from the Germans.
Yeah.
And again, Disney made a film about this incident that actually happened.
Yeah, and not just that, but they saved all the ranchers and staff there too. And this was a place where where the Austrian resistance had put some Austrian Jews that had gone undetected and managed to find places for them to work there.
Yep.
And the last battle of World War II is one of my favorite stories, is the Battle of Castle Itter, where it was a full-scale assault by the Waffen-SS on the German army, because at this point, Josef Gangl, who was the commander of the German army at Castle Itter, Castle Itter was a part of the concentration camp that was nearby. I can't remember exactly which one it was. It was one of the Dachau. It was Dachau. But they had kept their high important prisoners that weren't going to be in the general concentration camp in this castle. Josef Gangl was an artillery officer on the German Western Front, and so during the invasion of France, it just seemed like he was doing exactly what he's told to do, and they're just fighting to get back the land that lost in World War One, and like the propaganda all made sense at this point. Eventually he gets sent back to Eastern Front, and he sees what's happening in Austria and the concentration camps. And he says, "Hold on a minute, I think I've been fed a lie here." So he gets his entire artillery company to begin working with the Austrian resistance. And so there's an entire regiment of German officers and troops who are now feeding the rest of the Waffen-SS bad information and putting Austrian Jews in their patrol formations to get them to safe houses. And then he sees that Castle Itter's been abandoned because the Waffen-SS is pulling back to Berlin to defend it. So what he does is he gets his guy, says, okay, we're going to storm the castle. We're going to get all the prisoners out. We're going to see if we can get people out from Dachau. And we're going to set up a perimeter and then call the American commander, who was John Lee. And then the Austrian commander at the time, because the Austrians reformed their army, said, okay, great. Well, we'll support you from the town. And so we have the Austrian army, the German army, and the American army end up forming this alliance to save all these Jewish prisoners, political prisoners. One of them is actually like a French Olympian. And they form a defensive formation in Castle Itter, waiting for the American tanks to arrive to secure the town. The Waffen-SS come back because their orders are now to eliminate everyone in the camp. And the Germans and Austrians begin fighting them using what tanks they have. And there's one American scout car that broke away as there. So they're horribly outnumbered, outgunned, and holding out this castle. And what ends up happening is the French Olympian says, I'm going to run to the American headquarters and let them know that the SS are here early. And so he runs for, I think, like 12 hours. But they hold the line, and the only casualty of this battle on the Allied side is Commander Gangel, the commander of the German army. But they managed to save all the prisoners that the Waffen-SS were coming to execute. And then the German tanks and then the American tanks roll in, supplied with German ground troops, surround the SS, and they end up removing the remnants of the Waffen-SS that were in Austria. And so it's kind of the same about they're absolutely great people, good people on the German side, like you were saying, Ron, that unfortunately were fed a lie, but once they saw it for what it was, made the right choice, and you end up getting these great stories out of it.
Oh yeah. Oh, jeez.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it was a global conflict. I mean, if you study it at all, you start getting stories like this. You start uncovering stories like this. All right. I mean, one of the stories that I tripped over years ago, and it absolutely blew my mind, was the fact that when the Germans turned on Russia and attacked Russia, the Russians, fought with what they had. But the kicker is, it didn't take long for their Air Force to get decimated really bad. And in desperation, they literally turned to women pilots.
Yeah.
To fend off the German invasion, to hit their supply lines. But because they were women, all right, you had this sexist thing going on. And this is, again, part of the theme in times. Prior to World War II, aviation had come into its own. And a lot of European countries, Germany included, Russia included, whatever, had flying clubs everywhere. And everybody learned to fly. Well, so did these Russian women. So at one point, the Russian, Department of Defense is losing male pilots right and left. The Germans are getting closer and closer to their major cities, and they need a way to bomb them. So they asked for women volunteers to fly these old trainers that were pretty much like World War I planes made out of balsa wood and an engine. And they would send them up at night, 2 women, a pilot and a bombardier, to fly over German lines and drop bombs to, stop them being supplied.
Yeah.
Right? And ultimately, the Germans shot a few down and were totally not only shocked, but insulted that literally women were taking them out. And they gave them the name Night Witches.
Mm-hmm.
All right, and there were 2 divisions. There were 2 what do you call air corps? There were 2 divisions of bombers, and then eventually, some of those women pilots made their way into the fighter squadrons, and were literally fighter pilots against German Messerschmitts. and one was a woman named Lily, who by the end of the war, before she was shot down and killed, had taken down at least 5 or 6 German Messerschmitts and had the tagline, "The White Rose of Moscow." Insane, absolutely. When I first discovered this, I did a whole lot of research on it. I found there's several books about them at Amazon. I went and got those and read those. So one of them was actually written by an American woman pilot from World War II, right, who ferried the bombers over to England. And she met with some of these women after World War II because she was fascinated that they'd let women into combat, right, aerial combat. And so she wrote one of these books on some of these, women who had survived, this kind of combat, all right, to help save their country. So here's the kicker. I read this and learn about it, and within 2 or 3 years, I ended up in Moscow with a young college film crew that was filming the Russian Symphony Orchestra recording old John Wayne movie scores for a British CD company. True story, right? And we had 2 Russian drivers assigned to us. We were in Moscow for 8 days. And one of the days we're driving through Moscow and we come to the set of lights and we slow down. And I'm sitting in the back seat with one of the cameramen, and I turn around and I look as the car comes to a stop, and I look, and right there in the middle of the square is this big old statue of this woman fighter pilot. And I looked and I went, whoa. And my friends were like, what? I said, that's honoring the Night Witches. At which point the driver, who spoke a little English, here's perk up, turned around, goes, you know about the Night Witches? I said, oh yeah, I know about the Night Witches. Oh yeah, right. So there you go. Again, there's hundreds of stories like this out there. And just for the comic book connection, all right, I'd always hoped one day to maybe be able to write a comic book about this. Yeah. But guess what? Guy Ennis beat me to it. Nice. Like about 6 months after I found out DC was putting out a comic about the Night Witches, and Scott wrote it. He researched it and did it. And did a great job with it.
Yeah. One of my favorite things about the Night Witches is after the few of them had shut down, the Germans discovered they were women. They'd figure out, well, we in order to avoid being shut down in the future, we need to fly in undetected. And the Germans couldn't pick up their planes with radar because they weren't metal. They could hear their engines though, and the engines were a bit dead giveaway because they're so loud. Yep. So what they did is they end up going into high altitude, cut the engine, and then they would dive onto the German position, and then turn the engine back on once they deployed the bombs. And the Germans thought they were laughing. In reality, they were probably screaming because they're in free fall for so long. But the Germans could hear their voices echoing on the wind. And so after knowing they're being bombed by women, and then having bombs come out of seemingly nowhere in the night, and then hearing women laugh as they fly away, like, oh, they're witches. We must get bombed by witches.
Yep.
Right.
Oh boy.
Yeah. So that's one of my favorite stories as well, Ron. So thanks for bringing that up.
Oh, yeah. History's great. History's great. I tell you. I mean, fiction's all right, but true stories, holy smokes, all right.
I love when you can take a true story and then retell it in a way that you don't fictionalize it a little bit in a way that does it justice, but being able to retell the story.
It pays homage to it.
Yeah. I know at some point I want to do a story about Malunka Savage, the Lady of the Dark. So this is also some World War I, World War II history. So do you guys know who the most decorated soldier of all time is? Audie Murphy, who also became the actor.
I was going to say,
yeah. Who also became an actor. And he's a great story. But right behind him is a World War II soldier named Malunka Savage, also known as the Lady of the Dark. She was a Serbian soldier. And when Serbia was drafting, her brother was sick with tuberculosis, and he got served draft papers. So she went in his place, and she did refuse to cut her hair, so she just tied her hair into a bun and put it under her hat. However, early on, she was discovered by a sergeant who's like, "You're a woman. What are you doing here?" She's like, "I'm here to replace my brother." He's like, Well, you can shoot a gun and throw a grenade, so I guess that counts. And throughout the war, she keeps on distinguishing herself, and famously for rushing beyond Serbian lines as soon as the whistle blows, carrying a bandolier of grenades, which Serbia didn't have a grenadier corps, but she saw that some Austrians and Germans were doing that. So she would dress up like a grenadier and would just run up from the lines and start throwing grenades down into the the Austrian position. And she got shot a couple times doing this, but her kill count is at the point where they stopped keeping track of it because she would just blow up entire trenches by herself.
Wow.
And so she ended up getting Serbian Cross, the American Cross, French, and English Service Crosses, and surviving all of World War I to the point where she became a non-commissioned officer because Serbia wouldn't allow a woman to become a commissioned officer, but we'll make you a sergeant, but we'll give you command of a corps. It's just we won't give you the rank of lieutenant or commander. She ended up getting that after the fact, but after the war happened, she just retires to a little cottage in the woods and kind of goes forgotten until they do I think it's the 50-year memorial of World War I, and she comes up to the front, and they have the seating by rank and by medal count, and so as she's walking up, people are like, what's happening? And she takes off her jacket, and people just see that her service coat has a plate of medals and ribbons. Yeah. And so she is just a very interesting person that I love to turn that into a comic as well, because she was a woman that probably had the biggest balls in World War I.
No doubt at all. Whew.
Okay, well, this has been that Silverline show on Tuesday. Pre-orders for Wolf Hunter 2 have ended, so I thank you all who placed your pre-order. Make sure to keep track of your emails and all that. We'll get your comic to you. And if I want to get any last-minute add-ons, reach out to Roland. We'll get that figured out for you. Make sure to check out Hamlet's End. That's going on for another 30 days, and we'll be back to promote it throughout the rest of this month. I haven't got our topics up yet in the calendar, but I figured since we talked so much about World War II stuff during Wolf Hunter, we're going to be talking a lot about Westerns and the theme of writing Westerns, drawing Westerns, all that throughout the course of Hamlet's End. So next week we'll be talking about writing Westerns.
There we go.
Yeah. We'll be back at 8 p.m. Pacific time next week. Make sure to check out Wednesday Wham and Silver Sunday, 8 p.m. Eastern time on those respective days. Again, thank you all for your support and for backing Wolf Hunter. Really means a lot to me. So, see you next week. But until that time,
Take mine.
Hi, I'm Greg Horn. Make mine Silverline.